Hello, and welcome back to the Steel Woman podcast. I am your host, Osley, and today we're continuing on my story of deconstructing from Christianity. Last episode, we left off with Bart Ehrman making me cry in my kitchen. He said some things that made me feel like I had permission to keep pursuing truth and to really commit myself to this process of questioning and deconstructing my beliefs. So today I'm going to be sharing 7 things that really heavily influenced my deconstruction into turning into ultimately a deconversion from Christianity. So 7 sort of light bulb moments, 7 really impactful pieces of discovery that led to me walking away. I just want to make a note here that if you are currently going through a process of deconstruction, this does not mean that you are not going to be a Christian. At the end of it, it doesn't mean that you have to become an atheist or you have to switch religions. None of that. So my personal deconstruction journey ended with me no longer being a Christian, but your journey is your journey. So I just want to make a quick little disclaimer there. Asking questions is a good thing, no matter what your belief system is. In the midst of listening to a bunch of debates between atheists and Christians on YouTube, I also discovered the show on YouTube called The Atheist Experience. Maybe you've heard of it. Maybe you've heard the name Matt Dillahunty. And this leads into the first reason that I am no longer a Christian. And I want to go ahead and say that, hold on, let me just say it. I don't have to preface everything, right? The first reason that I am no longer a Christian is because I applied logic and reasoning to my beliefs and found that my beliefs could not stand up to that level of scrutiny and critical thinking. The reason I mentioned the atheist experience is because this show really started the education process for me, if you will, about logic and reasoning. I had learned a little bit about logic, I think, in high school. I know there was some logic in college, but I had never applied logic and reasoning to my beliefs before. In a weird way, cognitive dissonance, once again, is a theme here. I insulated or protected my Christianity, my faith, from logic and reasoning because I thought that the way you find God is not through logic, it's through feeling. And at the time, I didn't realize the problems with that, and we will get to that. But that is a little bit of the reason why I had never applied much logic and reasoning to my beliefs. There's a verse somewhere, and I always forget to look this stuff up, but I just looked it up so I can stop doing that awful thing that I do, which is say, there's a verse somewhere. I'm really bad at remembering where verses are. 1 Corinthians 1:18. For the preaching of the cross is foolishness to those who perish, but unto us who are saved, it is the power of God. And that was a verse that I used as a Christian to justify not applying logic and reasoning to my beliefs. And if anyone criticized Christianity or my belief system with logic and reasoning, I always just saw it as, oh, they're of the group of people who were just passing away. Of course it doesn't make sense to you. Rather than actually contending with their points and engaging with it. I'm not saying every Christian does that. I'm saying I did that, right? And that's obviously that is a problem. Watching the atheist experience was really helpful to me, mainly because it is set up in a way where regular, everyday people, mostly theists, call into the atheist experience and they give evidence for God. They give their best argument for why they think God exists, and then maybe even why their own personal version of God exists. And at the beginning, when I first started watching these episodes, I would listen to what the theist was saying and I would be agreeing with them, because they call in, right? And then Matt Dillahunty says, go ahead, you have a minute or whatever to get your point across. And as the theist was going, I'd be like, yeah, okay, I track with what they're saying. Like, that makes sense. What are the atheists gonna say? And then Matt usually would jump in and have his problems that he saw with their argument. And most of the time he would just completely annihilate their position. And it was really eye-opening, of course, but it was nice to live vicariously through the caller rather than feel like I had to defend my own beliefs. It made me uncomfortable because the things that theists were saying were things that I believed, and then I was hearing someone criticize that way of reasoning. It hurt a little bit, but it wasn't as bad because I felt like, it just wasn't me. I wasn't the caller. At the end of the day, I could sort of hide behind my screen and change my mind in private without attaching my ego or my sense of worth to the conversation. Does that make sense? Yeah. I learned about circular logic. I learned about different types of fallacious reasoning. I learned about the idea that, might makes right, which is an argument that I didn't realize I used to make as a theist. I used to say, well, God's all powerful, so he's, at the end of the day, he's right. Like, we can't criticize him because he's the most powerful and what he says goes. And I never realized that essentially what I was arguing was that power means you're justified in doing whatever you want. That was very eye-opening for me. But the big one was circular logic, learning about how you can't just say the Bible is the word of God because the Bible says so. And I don't necessarily think that every Christian uses circular logic to rationalize their beliefs, but I did notice a trend in the theists calling in. Usually it would get back to that being the problem, that they were making an assumption that the Bible was correct and that we needed to fact check reality using the Bible and not fact check the Bible using reality. As I was learning about circular logic, fallacies, all those sorts of things, I was also watching other debates, and I started listening to a lot of Bart Ehrman's podcasts as well. He has a great podcast called Misquoting Jesus. It's on YouTube, and I just highly recommend it if you're interested in biblical scholarship of the New Testament. I really think that learning about logic and reasoning was the main reason that I was able to deconstruct my beliefs so quickly, and I was able to apply those principles to other things that I was learning. Basically, I just think that critical thinking is a really valuable tool to use when getting new information, and essentially I was using that and for the first time applying it to my belief system. We get it. The second reason I'm not a Christian anymore is a light bulb moment for me in my deconstruction process that helped me realize that I was being irrational. I discovered the problems with fundamentalist Christianity. And again, like, the reason I want to be careful here is because I know not every Christian is a fundamentalist Christian, but for me, this exposed so much of the error of my thinking that I just felt like there was no way that I was ever going to be able to return to my original belief system once I learned about this. Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris did a number of debates in, I think, America, Canada, and the UK years ago. And I was listening to any debate that I could get my hands on about philosophy, morality, Christianity versus atheism, all of it. And these were some of the debates that I listened to, and here's where I developed my love of Sam Harris. I had never really given him much of a listen before because he was an atheist, of course, so why should I listen to Sam Harris? Just a quick note on Jordan Peterson. When I was a Christian, I really loved Jordan Peterson's content, and I think somehow I thought that he was a really good advocate for religion. But honestly, where I am now when it comes to Jordan Peterson, I find him really confusing. I don't understand what he's saying half the time. Sometimes I do, and sometimes it's really profound, and I am going to share something that he said that like changed the game for me. But yeah, I feel like I have to make a note on that because so many people have so many extreme opinions about Jordan Peterson, and I'm not sure why that is. Something that I have found, though, the more that I have listened to people like Sam Harris and Matt Dillahunty, Christopher Hitchens, they're so clear and concise, and I just prefer the way that they speak about things rather than Jordan Peterson. And I do have problems with some of the things that he said in the past. So I have to disclaim that because I am about to share something that he said that I do agree with, and I just want to make sure that no one out there thinks that I in any way endorse everything that Jordan Peterson says, because I don't. That being said, let me share with you something that Jordan Peterson said that I remember. I was in the kitchen again. I listened to a lot of debates while I was washing dishes, and I had to stop and I had to replay this because it blew my mind. At this point in the discussion, Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson are talking about Christian fundamentalists, and Jordan Peterson says this: they, fundamentalists, claim that the Quran, or the Bible for that matter, is the literal word of God. But more than that, they claim that their understanding of that word is correct, which means they conflate two things. Because you can imagine a situation where you had a book, and I'm not saying this is the case, this is an imaginative exercise, that you had a book that was extraordinarily complicated, and so that when you read it, it wouldn't be obvious that you understood it. Perhaps it wouldn't be obvious that you didn't understand it either. You can't get an uninterpreted version of the book. And so the fundamentalist claim is far worse. It's not only is there an absolute reality truth embedded in the book, but that their particular take on that absolute reality is the absolute take on that book. And so they make an assumption of their own omniscience and then pass that off on to God's. And I remember stopping and just being like, whoa, wait. He just described every religious person that have been surrounded with, including myself. That is such a problem. How have I never seen that before? How have I never understood that the arrogance that I had in order to say that my interpretation of the Bible was correct? It was like I was, astral projecting, soaring out of my body and looking down on myself and going, you think that you are amongst the people the rare group of people in the world who have all the answers. You think that everybody else in the world is but you have the absolute truth. It was like I was seeing my own hideous arrogance for the first time and being confronted with the irrational nature of fundamentalism. And I was shook. I was shooketh. I thought there's no way that I can ever go back there. I can still be a Christian, but I'm going to have to be a more progressive Christian, a more open-minded Christian. I can't go back to being a fundamentalist and thinking that I have it all figured out. And that was then and there the last that I ever thought to myself, okay, I'm gonna interpret the Bible and be the correct interpretation and get to tell other people what to do. That died pretty much then and there in that moment. It's kind of weird what makes you change your mind. I'm sure that I had heard these terms before and heard these ideas before, but they had never landed with me until that moment. And it all clicked. It all made sense. So at this point, I would have still considered myself a Christian, just a doubting Christian. Even then, though, I didn't really like the God that I was reading about in the Bible. And there were certain things I just couldn't get past. And so, yeah, let's keep moving. I'm realizing at this point in the podcast that the format I selected for this episode doesn't really make sense. So I'm scrapping it. Maybe the title will remain the same, but we're gonna completely switch gears and just continue on as though it's a story, because that just feels more natural. Third thing that was really impactful on my journey of deconstruction was deconstructing the free will argument. I had always said as a Christian that the reason there was evil, the reason there was sin, the reason there was suffering is because God gave us free will. And the reason that God gave us free will was because there is no way that He could have created us without free will and us be able to love Him and love each other. So in a way, it was His gift to us so that we could be something other than robots, right? This always made sense to me when I was a Christian. It was this little way of just making myself feel better about the fact that there was pain and suffering and evil in the world. I thought, well, it's worth it, because without all these things, we wouldn't be able to even know what true love is, right? As I was reading the Bible from the beginning and doing a little bit more research on predestination, I found that the idea of free will doesn't really exist in the Bible as much as the idea of predestination and God being in control of everything. So you have verses that talk about God hardening Pharaoh's heart, God turning away from people. You have verses that, I think there's a verse in the New Testament. Again, I will put these verses that I'm mentioning in the description. I just don't want to go through the trouble of citing off every single verse as I go. It is like majorly annoying for me. So pause. If you're interested about these verses, find them in the description. Go read them yourself. I encourage you to do so. There's also a verse in the New Testament that talks about vessels of destruction, and lots of verses about how God predestined us and chose us before the foundation of the world. A note on the vessels of destruction. To me, this seems like maybe God is hinting at the fact, or Paul, whoever's writing it, that God created people to destroy them. Like the point of them is for them to be destroyed, which is a really, really uncomfy idea. And so as I was learning more about free will in the Bible, I found free will is not in the Bible. Maybe I'll do another episode on where the idea of free will originates from, but that wasn't really important to me on my deconstruction journey. what was really important to me was this epiphany that I had as I was watching a TikTok video of a pastor on a campus talking with a student about evil and suffering and free will. This kid tells the Christian pastor, I would have rather be a robot without free will if it meant that millions of people wouldn't suffer. That would probably be better. And the pastor is, basically saying like, well, that wouldn't have been a good thing because we wouldn't be able to truly love each other. It would be impossible for God to create an environment where we could truly love him and not have free will. Like, those things have to be hand in hand. And as I was listening, I just started thinking about heaven. A lot of Christians are really excited to go to heaven. I know I was, and even at this point in time, that was still my goal, to get to heaven. And I started thinking about free will in heaven. Would we have it there? Would we have free will to sin and then be sent to hell? Would we have the knowledge of good and evil there? The free will to choose good or evil? Or is God going to create us a new nature where we don't even have a desire to sin and do evil anymore? We're given this beautiful new godly nature, and we can actually now, wait for it, love each other even more fully than before. That is the heaven I was looking forward to. I don't know about every single Christian, but for me, that was the heaven I was taught about, is that we would be given a new nature, new desires, a heart that would follow Jesus, love each other more fully, and we would not even have a temptation to sin because evil wouldn't be permitted in heaven and evil wouldn't be in us. So I was like, why couldn't God have created everything like that to begin with? It was impossible? Really? We're excited about that place. Like, that place already exists in our head. We can't wait for it. Why are we using God's inability to create us without free will and us also love him as an excuse? Why are we using that as an excuse when we're literally looking forward to that one day? It doesn't make sense. So immediately, once I realized that, I was like, oh, the free will argument, it's not just not in the Bible, it just like doesn't make sense. Not only that, but if a God is creating free will, already your free will has some limitations because he's the author of it, right? I don't know. For me, and maybe this won't land with everybody, but for me, it was just like, okay, I think free will is really just a way that I was trying to make myself feel better about things as a Christian, but I wasn't actually thinking through it logically. So again, applying logic to that belief, it fell away. I'm realizing now that I didn't quite finish this thought or spell out this point, so let me do so really quickly. If you're thinking at this point in the podcast, well, no, the reason for suffering and sin isn't free will, it's the fall. It's when Adam and Eve chose to disobey God. They were exercising their free will that God gave them in order to disobey him. And so when I was a Christian, I thought God gave them free will because they needed to have free will in order to be able to truly love them. So I didn't mention Adam and Eve while deconstructing and explaining this point here, and I think it's worth mentioning just in case any of you are thinking, what about the fall? Kind of the same thing. The fall was a result of God giving his beings free will. At this point in time, of course, I wasn't a fundamentalist Christian anymore. I was still seriously doubting God's goodness as I was reading the Bible, and now I didn't even have a good reason for all the suffering and the evil in the world, whereas I had always had free will as my reason. And I was calling myself a bad Christian. I was like, I'm not an atheist. I still believe in God. I'm scared of going to hell. I want to figure all this stuff out. I'm just a bad Christian right now. And I needed a creative outlet that felt safe for me to express myself. I was writing down my questions. I was listening to these debates, but I needed something else. And I started writing poetry. And I know what you're thinking. Well, I tend to hate poetry, and I don't gravitate towards it at all. I find it to be hard to understand and flowery. For whatever reason, writing poetry was like so healing for me during this time. And I want to share with you a poem that I wrote at this point, right after I abandoned my belief in the free will argument, because I think it really perfectly illustrates where I was at and the back and forth that was going on in my head much more concisely than I can do even in a podcast episode. So let me share that poem with you. I just now finally realized the good news is just bad disguised. Although Jesus was crucified to eternal life for us provide, the truth is that not all who have died have heard about this Jesus Christ. And even if all Christians prayed that every single soul be saved, we know the path to hell is paved with vessels of destruction made by God, the author of our fate. But God has might, which makes it right for him to pick which souls he'd like to choose to smite or show the light. That's why we shouldn't pick a fight with God, despite him seeming quite abusive, right? Unless the God who reigns on high is not in charge of his design. I think I better stop myself and put my questioning on the shelf. Just simply focus in on grace and wait until I see his face. Just shut my mouth and know my place. After all, who is the clay to question the potter? Well, the problem with that question is the clay is not a daughter. Why create a living thing just to allow its suffering, especially if you knew it all and set the system up to fall? I've heard the theory of free will, that we're robots without the choice to kill, that we need to know good and evil so that we're even capable of loving anyone at all. But let me stop and ask you this. When I'm in heaven filled with bliss, will I have free will there as well? The choice to sin and go to hell? Or will I only sing his praises, forget my past amongst the daisies, never shed a tear again, and no more have the choice to sin? I'm still supposed to praise his name when he has shifted all the blame to me, who wasn't even there when Daddy Adam ate the pear? So sorry. I thought that was so funny when I wrote it. Anyways. God had to punish Adam's kin because that's the power of our sin. God's power in comparison's not strong enough to uncondemn. He needed human sacrifice to rid the world he made of vice. It makes more sense we have to eat the flesh of Jesus' blood so sweet, God killing his own son so he could all the power of sin defeat, when God could simply sin delete. Could God just simply sin delete? Who is the clay to question the potter? Well, the problem with that question is the potter's not a father. Why create a living thing just to allow it suffering? Especially if you knew it all and set the system up to fall. The end. I remember like shaking, trembling, writing that poem because it felt so intellectually honest and raw and vulnerable and cathartic all at the same time. It was this release. I was like, this is everything I'm feeling. This is everything I'm thinking into one beautiful poem, and I can just repeat it to myself as like a coping mechanism almost. I remember I would take walks outside and I'd be reciting this poem to myself under my breath, muttering to myself. People probably thought I was weird. And being afraid that God was going to strike me with a bolt of lightning. Like actually scared. Like kind of looking up at the sky, like just waiting, because it felt so disrespectful. It felt so like, who am I to question God? But then who is the clay to question the potter? Well, the problem with that question is the potter's not a father. Just like the problem with that analogy, I was learning about like fallacies and stuff, and like faulty analogies, like a faulty comparison. And you know, the problem with that analogy of the potter and the clay is the clay is an inanimate object. It's not a living, breathing, sentient being. And the potter is not an actual father creating a living being. It's apples and oranges. It's not a good analogy, even though it's in the Bible, and I'd always accepted it before. But it was still my opinion at this time that even if I didn't like the things in the Bible, even if I didn't like the God that I was reading about, even if it made me mad or sad or upset, I couldn't understand it, whatever, that didn't mean that it wasn't true. And I knew that was also fallacious reasoning. And so I didn't abandon belief. I couldn't. I felt like, well, I still think this stuff is most likely true. So I'm just going to have to live with that. And maybe I'm a vessel of destruction. Maybe I was made for hell. And I'm just now realizing that. And now I'm going to have to live the rest of my life knowing that this is all I get. And then I'm going to spend eternity in hell. And there were a few weeks, if not months, there where I was in that place. I was like, I think this is what it's like to believe in God and not be able to love him, and to know that you're doomed. And I was just like, there's nothing I can do. Especially if predestination is a thing, right? Like, I'm going to hell, clearly. I'm a bad Christian. I don't love God. I'm not worshiping him. I can't see how he's good anymore. And it was at this point where, I was obviously calling myself a bad Christian, but I also was just sort of joking about it to my husband, like, yeah, I'm definitely going to hell. And he would say, like, well, I might be there with you. I'm like, no, you're not. You're good. But I think I'm gonna be there. And I truly felt like there was nothing I could do at that point, and I was gonna go to hell. And this is the second poem that I wrote, and this is the last one I'll share, I promise. And I wrote it and I read it to my husband, and like, it was really emotional because this was coming from my heart at this point. I was coming from someone who really believes that they were probably going to burn in hell forever. And I wrote it for my husband. What if I get to heaven just to find out you're not there? How will I be happy if I'm fully aware that your soul didn't make it, that you blew your only chance, and now we'll never meet again? You'll burn forever for your sin, in hell while I'm in heaven? How will I be happy in heaven even then? But if you're the one in heaven and you find out I'm not there, I hope you'll still be happy and not even aware that my soul didn't make it, that I blew my only chance. I hope it's like we never met. Eternal life makes you forget that I'm in hell while you're in heaven. I hope you'll be happy in heaven even then. The power of expressing oneself through creative outlets is so underrated. It is so profoundly healing. And I was trying to do this while using that logical side of my brain and deconstructing. I wanted there to be some beauty and meaning in the pain because it hurt so bad. And yeah, I'm not there anymore. I am free from that dark period. Not to say that I haven't gone through other dark periods, which I have, and I still struggle, but I'm not there anymore. And I'm excited to continue sharing what got me out of that. So let's keep moving. I don't think this has been quite an hour. I don't want to talk too long, but let's keep going. So while I am convinced that I am going to hell, I kept on listening to debates and I kept on doing research because I wasn't done learning. I felt like I was just scratching the surface when it came to the Bible. And I was listening to a lot of Bart Ehrman, who I still love his stuff. Other scholars too that he'll interview on his podcast I like a lot. This is just like a whole advertisement for Bart Ehrman. What happened next changed my view on the Bible forever. So deeply, so fundamentally. I was shooketh. It was surreal. I had always heard that there are contradictions in the Bible, yada yada. I'd always heard atheists say this, and I just rolled my eyes and been like, the good news of the cross is folly to those who are passing away. Yeah, it was just a nightmare. I was listening to a Bart Ehrman debate, and he was talking about contradictions in the New Testament. And he gave an example of Judas's death. Talked about the two different accounts, and then he said, I encourage anyone who's curious about this, don't let me be the one who's telling you. Go read it for yourself. You decide whether or not it's a contradiction. And this is what I really appreciate about Bart Ehrman, is he does that. He's like, go read it. You tell me what you think. And so I paused the debate and I went and ran and I read the different accounts of Judas's death, which go read it. Go stop the podcast, go read it right now if you haven't already. I remember flipping back and forth. I can't remember the two. I don't know what gospels they're in. I'm sorry, you guys. My brain just does not remember that sort of stuff. But they were completely contradictory. As I was reading them, I was like, they're not the same. They contradict. How can we reconcile this? How? I kept listening to the debate, and the Christian apologist gave an idea of we could reconcile it like this. And it was the most bizarre way of trying to reconcile it. And I was just like, dude, I just read it. Just admit that there's a contradiction. I don't understand. You're embarrassing yourself. This is a clear, blatant contradiction. It was so painful for me to hear him just kind of, well, no, there's a way you could reconcile it. And I just, it irritated me a lot. And then I learned about other contradictions. The accounts of Jesus's birth that are different in the Gospels that contradict. You have the accounts of Jesus's death that contradicts. And I remember I took time to do this. This was really important to me. I wanted to read the accounts myself and decide whether or not they read like contradictions or if they just read like smaller bits of a puzzle all fitting together. I had like 4 fingers like flipping back and forth trying to read them all, back to back. I was like, you know what? Yeah, it does seem like they contradict. Like if I'm using my brain here, if I'm thinking really hard and using reading comprehension, it feels like they contradict. It's not saying the same thing. There was a part of me though where it's like, no, these have to be reconciled, right? These can be reconciled. But I realized in order to reconcile them, I was gonna have to just start making stuff up, especially for the Judas's death one. It's like you could make stuff up to make it reconcile, but if you're just reading the accounts, at the end of the day, like it does seem like they contradict. So again, I was confronted with this dilemma. It's like, do I just force myself to believe that there must be some way to reconcile them, and if I go look for the answers and find historical context, maybe I can weave this elaborate theory as to how they can be reconciled? Maybe I could do that. But that just felt like that was probably going to be a lot of mental gymnastics, and it didn't feel like it was going to be very intellectually honest. I was like, if the stakes weren't so high, I think it would be really easy for me to say, yeah, obviously they contradict. Like, it's only because I'm so scared of the consequences of having to accept the fact that the Bible might not be free of contradictions. That felt like, if I concede that, I concede the divinity of the Bible. I concede all of it, and it's just all gonna fall apart. Little did I know, though, at the time that there are Christians who remain Christians and still accept that the Bible has visible contradictions. I didn't know that. So I was very much so still in that fundamentalist headspace of like, no, the Bible has to be infallible. So yeah, I have since listened to Christian biblical scholars who admit that there are inconsistencies and they still believe in the Bible, they still believe in Jesus. So I just didn't know that at the time. At the time, it just felt like there's no way what I'm reading is real. Is it a trick of the light? And at this time too, I kind of felt superstitious, and so I was like, is Satan tricking me right now? Is Satan in my head right now making these passages seem like they're contradicting, but they're actually not? It was really scary. It was like, I don't like to just throw the word trauma around, but it just felt so significant. I also recognized at this point that I couldn't use circular logic to affirm the truth of the Bible anymore. That was just faulty reasoning. And so I was in this really tricky space, and I ultimately just decided, like, yeah, I'm reading 2 things that contradict. I think I have to accept that. I think if I don't, I'm tiptoeing down delusion alley. This sparked an interest in me to find out more about the Bible and how it was written, and whether or not we can depend on the sources, that they're reliable sources. And I started listening to a lot of biblical scholarship and biblical scholarship debates about whether or not the Gospels are reliable, about whether or not the Gospels are eyewitness accounts, and this was another major head spinner for me. I had not ever realized that the names of the Gospels are not accepted by even a majority of scholars as being the names of the authors who wrote it. In other words, I found out that the Gospels are probably not eyewitness accounts. I don't know how I had missed this, And this is where I start to be like, did nobody in church ever mention this to me? Or did I just not listen? Like, how could I have missed such a fundamental, basic fact that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are probably not even written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John? How did I miss that? It was a little bit embarrassing. I was like, was I even a Christian? At this point, I started really worrying that Bart Ehrman and other atheist biblical scholars were leading me astray. I was like, there's no way. Like, why am I only hearing atheists talk about this? They must be making it up, right? This is something that they have decided to come up with after they've deconverted from Christianity to just make themselves feel better about leaving. It's like, there's no way. I was in denial. And it was only when I heard that, oh, there's Christians out there who are also like, yeah, we're not sure. They might be forgeries. Where I was like, whoa, what? So this is like actually maybe true? This isn't just like a scheme of Satan? I mean, this was so hard for me to wrap my head around. And I remember trying to find a lot of different opinions. And I found a Christian opinion about whether or not the Gospels are written by eyewitnesses. Some Christian apologist, I don't even know who this guy is, but he said, no, I think we can reliably say that it was written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, because they probably were literate. Luke was a doctor, Matthew was a tax collector, Mark was a scribe of Peter, I think. Don't quote me on that. And John was the son of Zebedee, and Zebedee was like a rich dude who probably had sons who were well educated. I remember I heard this Christian's explanation. I was like, cool. There you go. All the atheists are just lying. And then I heard an atheist scholar say, yeah, no, there's some people who think that there is reason to believe that these might have been written by the disciples. But the fact is we don't have the originals, and these names were slapped on the Gospels years and years after. None of the authors actually claim to be the people whose names are on the Gospels. They're not really written like first-hand accounts, especially like Luke is not written like a first-hand account. Or is it Mark? I can't remember now. And so essentially I was just like, I don't know who to believe. And again, as I'm saying this, go do your own research. I'm not a scholar, so go do your own research. But where I got to in this sort of dilemma was, okay, there's some Christians that think it is reasonable to believe that the disciples all wrote Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and it's believable, and they may have been literate. We're all good to go. These are first-hand accounts. But there's some Christians who are like, no, dude, that's probably not true. There's even some Christians who think that John is a forgery, and they're still Christians. There's some atheists, most atheists, I guess, would say that these are probably not first-hand accounts. So I was just like, who do I believe? Do I believe these Christians who are saying they are first-hand accounts? Do I believe the atheists? Do I believe the Christians who are in the middle ground? Like, where I got to was the fact that this is even a debate says a lot to me about the divinity of the Bible. If God wants us to read these things, believe these things, know these things for a fact, why was it done in such a sloppy manner where we can't even be sure that the books are written by people who were actually there? Seems like at the very least there would be a little bit more proof. There wouldn't be such debate. So that's what really bothered me. I was like, I don't really know who to believe. The fact that this is a debate is really troubling to me, and it came back again to my issues that I had with the nature of God, and like, why, God, are you making this so confusing? If this is the most important stuff in the world, why didn't Jesus write a gospel? Why didn't you put some proof in the Bible so we knew without a shadow of a doubt that it was true? I don't even know what that would be, but an all-powerful God who's omniscient and all good probably would be able to figure that out, right? So the more that I found out about how the Bible was written and the evidence that we have for the Gospels being first-hand accounts, the debate surrounding that, the fact that we don't have the original copies of these manuscripts, all that for the first time made me think, wait, maybe this isn't even true. And that was kind of a for me. Like, I had already gotten to the point where I was like, this is really unfortunate. This is an unfortunate truth. I hate the fact that this is true. I hate the fact that I'm going to hell. This was the first time where I was like, wait. Are there actually good reasons to even believe that this stuff is true? And so that was another turning point, and that's where I want to finish this episode, because there's a lot more to get into. I'm going to get into Paul. Oh my gosh. I also want to get into the logical fallacies that even if we had first-hand accounts of the Gospels and all those things, why I'm not sure that I could even believe the claims and why I got there. Basically just continue on with my deconstruction story and finally talk about faith and why I don't think that faith is this amazing virtue that everyone made it out to be when I was a Christian, and all that good stuff. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast episode. I wrote very detailed notes for it, but I still felt like I was all over the place. I appreciate you so much for listening. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you next week, next Thursday.